I would like to acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional custodians and elders of the land on which we meet. You didn't come here to listen to me carrying on with lots of society news. We all came to hear Benita Parker from the West Wallsend Heritage Group. Now, I think most of you know Benita from the wonderful podcast series that she has just done for the Society called In the Shadow of Mount Sugarloaf. Now, if you haven't listened to any of those podcasts in that series, I hope you will, because it is just a fabulous roundup of the history of West Wallsend. Now, I could tell you quite a few other things, but Benita's looking a bit dubious there. So I won't do that. I will just introduce Benita and thank her very much for coming along to tell us a little bit about the story of Mary Johnston, one of the earliest people to settle in West Wallsend, and later on she was wife of the owner of the Museum Hotel. The topic of Benita's talk today is Bush to Bar. Welcome, Benita.
Today, I'd like to take you back to the life of one of our earliest settlers, especially in the foothills of Mount Sugarloaf, in the shadow of Mount Sugarloaf, we could say, I suppose, in the 1860s. Just let your mind run back a little. No roads, no cars, no electricity, no radios, no phones, and definitely no TVs, but plenty of bush, plenty of bush. Today's presentation is about a real person whose name is Mary, who came to Australia as a small child in 1849. For those whose maths is a little shaky, that's 176 years ago. Bit of a time. It's based on facts that have been researched by many people, but elaborated on by me as I take you into the life of Mary from bush to bar. Okay. Now, I'm not sure whether you're used to this, but some people like to strip, and I'm one of those. So you just have to put up with my derobing. I can get myself unhooked. And to get into character. Because what I do with my story of Mary is try and move you into Mary's life. So we become part of her journey, from her beginnings in England to her death at West Wallsend. So I hope you are happy to travel along with me. You'll notice my gear is Victorian. She lived right through the Victorian era, 1849 to 1918. So it was right through the bulk of Queen Victoria's period. So long sleeves, high necks, regardless of what the climate was like, skirts, petties, I don't know, what do you call it? An apron over the top, all that in our climate as well. Poor old Victoria didn't know anything about Australian climate. Okay, let's get going. Welcome to today's presentation of life of Mary Johnston, the real person who came to Australia with her parents in 1849. It has been researched and presented by myself on behalf of West Wallsend District Heritage Group, working out of and into a conjunction with the new Sugar Valley Library Museum. I was born in Somerset in England to Charles and Mary Mountain in 1846. If you know anything about England in the 1830s and 40s, conditions were very hard. And my mother and father were just very ordinary working class people. My father sometimes worked as a miner, sometimes worked as a labourer, sometimes didn't work at all. And so he had his problems. But my mother equally had her problems. Most of the women in Mum's day had large families, but then so did I. She had to wait for 6 years before her first baby arrived, and that was Sarah, and Sarah was born in 1840. Then a couple of years later, along came Paul, and then she had to wait again, but then it was worth it because I arrived in 1846. But I think they realised that 3 was going to be their family, and conditions were really difficult. And about that time, a message percolated through to Somerset that in a faraway place called Australia, they were looking for people who would work in mines, in coal mines for the Australian Agricultural Company, a new company that was established. My mother and father talked about it, and what a momentous decision that was. They decided that they would move to Australia because, first of all, Dad would have work, and secondly, we would have a home. It was a momentous occasion, something that was really difficult to do. Leave all your family, leave everything and get aboard a ship. You didn't know where you were going. They made that decision and we left on board the Victoria, would you believe? The Victorian. It was a good ship. The captain was good. We only lost about 2 passengers on the way out. I don't remember much about it. I was 3 years old. But I do remember that I was an attachment to my mother's arm because she was terrified that she was going to lose me over the side. And my father was given strict instructions and he had to hang on to Paul at all times because Paul was 9. I'm sorry, Paul was 7. And a 7-year-old boy on board a ship, you can imagine. So we travelled for months across the ocean. I don't remember any of it. My sister, of course, Sarah, she was a good girl. She was 10 and she helped Mum look after me. I remember that. And we got to Adelaide. And I thought, oh, we can get off the ship now. And so did Mum. But no, we weren't allowed to get off the ship at Adelaide. They said, no, you've got to go round to Melbourne. Okay, so we kept on travelling around the coast to Melbourne. We got to Melbourne and we were told, well, yes, you can get off, but you've got to get into a coastal steamer. So we were offloaded into a smaller vessel and set off again around the coast. We called into Sydney and we thought, this is going to be it. But no, we weren't allowed off in Sydney either. We continued up the coast to a place called Coal River or Hunter's River, and we came in there. And there were houses, there were people. But no, we weren't going to get off there either. We were taken further upstream to Hexham. Hexham. There's nothing at Hexham. There wasn't much there then either. Now, at Hexham, it was a place for loading timber, nothing else at that stage. And so they'd drop a couple of planks from the boat over onto the wharf and you'd walk the plank to get off. Well, you can imagine my mother having absolute hysterics. She brought us all the way across the ocean, and here we were going to have to walk the plank to get off the boat. A great big sailor comes along, puts me up under one arm, and he picks Paul up under the other. Flogs us on the wharf. We're there. The whole Mounter family has arrived in Australia. We're in Australia. You might be interested to know that hotel is still there. It's McDonald's today. And it was built in about 1820. And it's the halfway point between Newcastle and Maitland. You stop there for refreshments. The next 10 years passed fairly uneventfully. My sister Sarah, who was 10 when we arrived, became 20. He got married to a really lovely young man, and they set up a house in Wallsend. And Paul turned 14, and so he had to go work with his father. So they set off each morning into Newcastle to the coal mines where Dad had been working ever since the ship had arrived. That meant that Mum and I were at home together. And I was enjoying it. I was trying to go, to sing, to learn songs, to learn my writing and reading, and really relax and enjoy my mother's company. But then I turned 14, didn't I? And Father said, "Yeah, daughter, it's time you got yourself a job." Oh, Father, it's time. You're 14, it's time you earned a living. So, next morning, I put on my best skirt, my walking boots, my nice blouse, and set off from Wallsend because we moved across from Hexham across to Wallsend. Mother couldn't stand the mosquitoes and the smell and all the other stuff. Wallsend was much better. And so Dad used to walk into work from Wallsend into Newcastle to the mines all the time. So he takes me along with him on this day. And we come to a huge, big, fancy, elaborate hotel in Newcastle. I don't know what its name was. I just looked at it and thought, it's massive. And Father goes in, meets the owner or the manager, and he said, the lass is looking for work. And he said, well, is she a good worker? Yes, my daughter's a good worker. She's 14 and she's strong. Okay, she can start as a chambermaid. Now, at that stage, I didn't have any idea what a chambermaid was. I learned very quickly. Not the best, most salubrious job to start off with, but that's where I started. So I started off as a chambermaid. But the owner of the hotel said, if you work hard less, you don't have to stay down there, you could become something better. So I did work hard. And within about 12 months, I was #1 maid, telling all the other maids what to do and how to keep the rooms in order and keep the place looking nice. It was about this time that a man had a lovely Scottish brogue, had a lovely accent. He used to come and he used to say, Mary, you got a few minutes, come and sit down and have a chat. And if I wasn't committed to anything, yes, we'd go and sit out on the veranda of the hotel, or sometimes under the shade of the big tree out the back, and we'd just sit and chat. And I liked him. I loved listening to his voice. It was nice. And one day he said to me, Mary, he said, I'd like to talk to your dad. And I thought, oh, that's nice of him, isn't it? Yes. So I said, no problem. So when I went home, I said, Dad, there's this man calls himself William in at the hotel. He visits there. He works in the mines. He said he'd like to meet with you. Oh, okay. So next time Dad was available, into town we went, and the two men sat down and they had a beer, had a talk, and I was allowed to stay in the room. And I'm there, and next thing I could see William was really sort of agitated, and he said, Mr. Mounter, I'd like to ask a favour. Could I have your daughter's hand in marriage? Oh, Father's face lit up. I think he was really excited at the prospect. I think that's the word I used. And my father said, yes, she's a good worker. She's a fine lass. You know, and what are your prospects? I've got a mine and I work in the mine at least, and I've got some land out of a place called West Wallsend, or out that way, beyond Wallsend. Oh, okay, that sounds good. So the date was set. And we were married on the 2nd of May, 1863. I was just 17. Yes, and I look back and I think it was a very special occasion. Mother helped me, if I can don my beautiful hat, because hats were becoming all the vogue then, and you had to make them yourself. So I made my beautiful hat. Mother found some material that would do as a beautiful wedding robe, and I donned that. Oh, it will come around. The wedding took place in the minister's house, and my sister was there with her new husband. My brother was there. The other maids from the hotel had come along. My father and mother were there, and of course William Johnston was a lovely Scottish brogue. He was about 20 years older than I was. He was 27 when I was 17, but he was a really nice man. So we decided the best thing to do was to get an early start after the marriage. And my mother and father lived in Wallsend, as you remember me talking about. So we set off to Wallsend. Oh, that's just a little insert, because that's one of my daughters, Janet, many, many years later. And I didn't have a photograph taken, but I sometimes think if I'd had a photograph taken of me when I was married, I would have looked just like my daughter, Janet. Don't you think there's a similarity? Yes. Anyway, we couldn't stay dressed up in all our fine clothes for very long. That was life. We loaded everything into our horse and cart. And we were very fortunate that William was able to buy a horse and cart, because this man was leaving town, and so he sold it to him. And we were able to put our axes and our saws and some sugar and tea and milk, sugar and tea and flour into it, and we were ready to set off. We said goodbye to the family, and early the next morning, we set off from Wallsend to our new home at Apple Tree Flat. You might say, where's Apple Tree Flat? We'll find out. The road out to Wallsend from Newcastle was quite good. The road from Wallsend to number A pit wasn't too bad, because there were 3 pits in Newcastle, in Wallsend at that stage: A pit, B pit and C pit. A pit had been going for 2 or 3 years, and there was a good road to that. B pit had been going for a little while, but C pit was only very new. So we're in our horse and cart. This is what the road degenerated to. You didn't really call it a road at all. Holes and stumps and everything. Good for a bullock, or a bullock team maybe, and that's about all. Or a single horse. You could manage a horse, or you could walk if you wanted to. And I had to do that a few times, because William said, this is too steep for the horse, we need to get out and walk. Or the water's too deep, whatever it was. I was in and out of that cart a number of times. This is just a mud map to show you where we went. We started off with Mum and Dad at Wallsend. We went past A pit, B pit, C pit. This is all bush up through here. Reached the crest, and where that blue arrow is where we could look out and we could see water. And I said, look, water. And William said, they call that Lake Macquarie. Lake Macquarie, but we're not going there. Oh, so I settled back down onto the hard seat again, and we came down through what is currently Edgeworth, along the main road of Edgeworth, out, and we started to head off roughly where St Benedict's is now, and where that blue arrow is. And again, I looked at, oh, there's the water again. Yes, Lake Macquarie, we're not going there, says William. And anyway, we get down to this area here near the creek, and there's quite a bit of water there, a lot of fish. In fact, later on when my boys arrived, they used to go there to fish. And someone had made provision to actually cross that creek. They'd dropped a couple of tree trunks across it and put some timbers across it, so we got across the creek without having to go down through it. When we got to the other side, I said, William, are we nearly there yet? And he said, not long, lass, not long. So we moved on a little further, and this is your new home. This is your home, my love. This is what I've built for you. He was so excited. William had spent hours going out into the bush, cutting the timber down, cutting the trees down, and making provision for our first home together. I didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. It was a bit of a shock, as you can imagine. I'm 17. There's bush all round. It's dark. There are flies. There are mosquitoes. My beloved William excited about this beautiful home. And he said, here's your kitchen over here. And here's the bathroom out here. And the bed's just in behind the window. Yes, that was our first home. A lot of people built their homes in stages. When you first got married, you didn't have much and you started off with something very simple. This is a photograph of an actual home in Lambton in the 1870s. And you can see what happened there. First, the little part at the front, like our home. And then, as the family arrived, the children arrived, the house was extended back and became a bigger home. You can see her laundry. My laundry was exactly the same, a tin tub. Did the washing, it washed the bodies, it washed the clothes, it did all those chores, so long as I was there with it. And this is sort of the next stage of house. We never got to have a home like this. It was more one of the settlers who stayed permanently in the district, and that didn't quite happen to us in the story, as the story goes. But your living accommodation was always kept separate from your kitchen, because in the kitchen often there was no stove as such. It was an open fireplace, and the logs would roll out, and the house or the kitchen would catch on fire. In fact, around about this time, about the 1870s, there was a young woman by the name of Elizabeth Nelson. Her father was a publican at Young Wallsend, and she was 21, and she was a lovely girl, and she was just helping in the kitchen. Log rolled out, bought these beautiful skirts that Queen Victoria insisted we could wear. She went up in flames, and it took her about 5 hours to die. Just imagine, one of the sad things, and that was why we were in that area. The story came through. This is more like our place, where our house was at Apple Tree Flat, and you can go out towards Killingworth and you can drive through this area because it's a real place and where we really lived. The timber was tall and skinny like this, and if we wanted to have a place to graze a horse or a cow, we had to clear it. There was no cleared grassy spots. And so I very quickly learned the axe, the crosscut saw, and anything else that meant that we could chop wood, we could light fires, we could clear the block. And this is sort of much more like a modern home, but the country around it was what I wanted to show you. And the other thing that I forgot to mention in the other picture was the dress, the outfit the women were wearing. Not unlike this, right? Skirts, tops, up to the neck, hair pulled back. This lass is the same, and she's got a little scarf around her for warmth, I imagine. And you can see the children about every 2 years, 18 months to 2 years, a new birth. Talking about new birth, I had 12 beautiful babies. 12 beautiful babies. We started about 12 months after I was married, and I said to William one day, William, I think I'm pregnant. And he picked me up and whirled me around. He was so excited. And I was terrified because we were in the bush and Mum was miles away. What was I going to do having a baby by myself? And he said, don't worry, there's midwives around. There are women who've had many babies. You'll be right, you'll be right. And so sure enough, I was right. 12 months after we were married, along came James. James was one of those boys that you always want to have. He was big, he was strong, he was healthy. He couldn't wait to follow his father. No matter what his father did, James would be there trying to follow him. And, and then 2 years later, along comes Charles. And Charles is a Me Too type baby. anything that James did, me too would do it. Charles would be out there following. And then 2 years later, I had my next little baby, Lucy. She was my first little girl. And I didn't know, because I was only just over 20, that when you had little girl babies, they weren't any different to having little boy babies. And I thought because she was tiny and crying and not very well, that was what happened with little girl babies. But the women told me, no, she was a frail child and she possibly wouldn't survive. Now that's pretty disheartening when you're out in the bush and your first little girl baby is not a strong child. But it doesn't stop life from going on. And so another 2 years later, and Margaret arrives. Margaret is just the other extreme. She's just like James. Put her down on the ground and she's crawling before she could move just about. She wanted to pick coloured flowers and feathers and anything that was bright. She'd gather them all together and she had a little place that she hid things that were specially for Margaret. And then in 1871, we had a terrible, terrible storm. It was inches and inches of rain, a bit like we've had, except worse, I think. And it came down, and of course, most settlers built their homes close to a creek, and you planted your crops close to a creek. But if you have a flood that comes down off the mountain 8 or 10 inches, it just came up and tore everything away. Our house was all right, but our garden was ruined. We lost some of our chickies, and some of the other people lost a great deal more than we did. That was 1871. There were floods after that, and there will continue to be, but that was one of the worst. I didn't tell you about the rest of my family, and I don't intend to, but Margaret came, then Thomas. Now, that's what I need to do, though, because before Thomas arrived in 1872, I was sitting one day with Lucy, because remember, I have 2 babies now. Lucy's still not strong, and Margaret is a baby, getting stronger all the time. And so I'm sitting beside the fire one day nursing Lucy, and it was just after this storm and the rain, and I don't know whether she got a chill or what happened, but anyway, I'm nursing her, and passes away in my arms. And I've got 3 littlies, and I just sat there and sobbed. And then William came home, and I said, we've lost our little Lucy. He said, we'll be all right, lads. Be all right, I'll take care of it. So he took the 2 little boys, James and Charles, out into the bush, and they chopped some timber, and they made a little coffin, and they put Lucy's little body into the coffin. And then he went out, and there was a great big boulder over on the side of the property. He dug a grave beside the boulder, and he put the coffin into the grave, and the boys helped him fix it all up. And Margaret was able enough, she was about 18 months old at this stage, she was able enough to help with the flowers. And we went out in the bush and we got some flowers and decorations and put them all over the grave, and we put a cross with Lucy, 1868 to 1872. But time stands still for no person. 5 months after Lucy was gone, Thomas arrived. And then after Thomas's, Alexander and so went on. Life continued. But I always remember my first little girl, my little Lucy. I just want to introduce you to 3 or 4 of my neighbours. Now, anyone who's heard the podcast that I did will know that one of them was about a man by the name of Nottingham. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail except to say he was a pretty amazing man. He was probably one of the first men to settle in West Wallsend area when it was called Sandy Hollow, not the Sandy Hollow up the valley. And he brought his wife, Thomasina, and their family, and they had 5 or 6. And they lost a little girl about the same time as we lost Lucy. But he said when he turned 90, he was going to live to 100. Well, he didn't quite make it, but as you can see, he wasn't far off. He was born 1837. He died in 1932, a long time after both William and I had gone. He was still riding his beautiful horse around the countryside. And there are names, Notley names. If you go out to West Wallsend, you'll find Notley names that are there on roads and ponds and things like that, even to this day. So he and his wife arrived there ahead or before, and he was a timberman. He never really got involved in the coal industry except to provide timber for it. But he was one of our neighbours. He was we were here at Apple Tree. He was closer to where West Wallsend eventually was built. This one is Mr. and Mrs. Joseph Holmes. Joseph Holmes has left his name and his legacy in West Wallsend. If you go out to West Wallsend, part of West Wallsend is actually Holmesville. And anybody who lives in Holmesville will tell you they don't live in West Wallsend. So it's a very important part of the place. So this is actually a photograph of their original home, or an extension of their original home. Again, separate living quarters from their kitchen and eating areas. And then he raised his family. He was a real entrepreneur. He tried coal mining, and he continued to mine coal, but he also had his girls work dairy, and they used to have to take the milk across to Mid-Mine, across to Wallsend, and sell milk and butter and cheese and eggs and all those sort of products off. If there was a way of making money, Mr. Holmes knew what it was. And added to that, he also had a very sad life. When his oldest son was 26, and you'd be proud to work alongside your oldest son, wouldn't you, in a coal mine, and his name was Joseph Holmes as well. And they went off to the mine to work, as usual, one morning, and 9 o'clock, the roof collapses, and the younger son, or the eldest son, Joseph, is pinned under a fall of the mine. The father tries to get in and do all he can to help. Unsuccessfully, all he does is damage his own back. And so for the rest of his life, people make comment about the fact that, oh, Joseph Holmes bent and walked around with a stick. Wonderful story, lovely people. And there is still property out there that belongs to the Holmes family. There's Joseph Holmes, and 20 years after that first home which you just saw, he built this with the bricks from his daughter, one of his daughters, because he had 8 kids, one of his daughter's husband's brickworks. They built a brickworks out there, sort of just as you're coming out of West Wallsend towards Barnsley. And this was the first house made of brick in West Wallsend, well, in Holmesville, for Joseph and his family. And the last man I'd like to introduce you to is Mr. Duncan Cherry. It's an unusual name, is that he was an exceptionally green-thumbed or green-fingered man. He loved growing, and he had beautiful orchards. People used to walk out through Newcastle to buy his fruit, his oranges, his apples, whatever else he had, his greens, his groceries. He was a wonderful gardener. But remember the flood, 1871? Wiped him out. And wiped out the school. He had made provision for a little room, a little building to be the school, and they had up to 40 kids go to that school. The flood came down, all life is gone. We see the effects of floods today. Just think, they were doing that back in 1871. All the time I have been doing research into the Johnston family, and it's quite a long time, I found that all of a sudden, there's a lot of money. Now, a miner doesn't have a lot of money. Where does a lot of money come from? And I mean enough to build a huge, big hotel and a house and all the rest of it. I don't know. But I want to give you a little insight into what I think the secret was. When he came out from Scotland, he was about 25, but on board the ship, there was a young fellow who was only about 18, and his name was James Fletcher. And he was a real go-getter, a real 18-year-old. I'm into everything. I'm going to do all this, you know. And they came out. They went to Bendigo. They went to the gold mines. Did they strike gold? No. Well, they didn't find enough anyway to do. So after a couple of years of being on the breadline, they moved up here to Newcastle, and they still, they both went to work in the mines. Now they were in the mines, and my William was a pretty organised person. That's about the time he met me, and we got married. But James was into everything. He started a union in the mines, and then he started working as a manager of the cooperative mine at West Wallsend. And then he took on lots of, he also got married in there. He became the mayor of Wallsend. He became a councillor. Oh, and I forgot to mention that he owned a newspaper, the Newcastle Morning Herald, right? He was just a busy, busy man. But he'd also been a friend of my William's. I think over and over they might have had some insider trading. And my William was able to get some land, get his name onto some leasehold land, which he then sold on fairly smartly to Laidley and the Caledonian Coal Company. Because he comes home one day and he says to me, I don't think I'm going to work anymore at the mine. I think I'll just have a bit of a holiday, a bit of a rest. And I was worried because here we've got 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 children, and he's not going to work. And I don't know anything about the financial situation because in those days, that was men's business. Women's business was looking after the children, keeping the house. So I did as I was expected to do. And I think we moved house about that time. I can't remember because there were so many things happening. This was around about 1880. And we moved over closer to what is now West Wallsend. Not very far, it was only probably, but where our property was, it was pretty poor. And where the O'Donnells were, it was better quality soil. And I think we moved over there somewhere. So the years passed, and I had my last baby in 1885. And things were starting to happen in the community at that stage. Where we'd moved to, there were bush huts being set up and men starting to do things. And I said, what's going on? And William said, oh, they reckon there's coal out here. They're going to try and put down a mine and see if they can get some coal. So sure enough, they did. 1888, July the 4th, they opened the first coal mine in West Wallsend. And that's quite a significant photograph for many, many reasons. A couple I'll tell you. The poppet head was the first of its kind. They had never had an iron poppet head in Australia before. That was its first. And these people, there's about 150 men there with their top hats and their tails, etc., who had come by train from either Newcastle or Sydney. And when you think that 1888 by train from Newcastle or Sydney to West Wallsend for the official opening of the West Wallsend coal mine. And they called it that because the coal at Wallsend was really good quality. The coal at Central Wallsend was good. Why not call it West Wallsend so that people would know that the coal was really good? That's how it got its name. Okay, so we're there. Now you can't see William or myself or the family because we didn't rank to be inside the fence. So we're outside the screened area. This is only for invited VIPs. But when it was getting close to being finished and they were having their big meal, their banquet, William says to me, I want you to come with me, get the family together. And by this time, James, our eldest, is married. He's got a wife and a couple of little kids. So I gather the whole clutch all together and I said, Dad wants us, I'm not sure why. And he takes us up the hill a little way. And he said, You remember I promised you a castle? This is your castle. I could not believe it. I couldn't believe it. In West Wallsend, the very first building of any substance was this building built by my husband in 1888. What a magnificent structure. And that's our family. That's me in the black, and I'm not sure. And of course, James up the top. James always wanted to be top dog. Beautiful, beautiful building. You can see what I mean about the money. Where did the money come from? Wasn't my problem. William had it all in hand. So much so that he said, that's not big enough. We wanted bigger. And if you look at the next shot, he's built an extension on out the back, 3 shops, 2 halls, and about 6 accommodation rooms. Not bad, is it? And that's within 18 months of having built the first part. Oh, by the way, those who love Ralph Snowball, and I love his work, this is a Snowball work of art. Look at the road in front of the hotel. Beautiful, isn't it? The other thing that's interesting about this is my William was into PR, promoting our business. And so he advertised in his friend James Fletcher's newspaper that he had a coach that would run from our beautiful hotel, from the mine head down to Popple Creek, where you could catch the train to either Sydney or Newcastle. And that would go in the morning, meet the morning train. It would come back in the afternoon at 5 o'clock and meet the afternoon train. Not bad, not bad. And he did that while ever until there was another form of transport. Okay. And this one is just to show you what a sad state it is today. It's no longer a hotel. But it does show quite clearly that my William had the foresight to name his hotel, even when it was first built. You read the name? The Museum Hotel. And the reason he did that, remember I said my daughter, my second daughter, Margaret, was just like James. She was a real go-getter. She loved picking up anything that was bright and sparkly. By the time she was 6, 7, 8, she had her father teaching her how to do taxidermy, stuffing birds and animals. And she was so good at it that when they had the shows in my 1890s, she beat all the men. She scooped the pool. She got prizes in the Sydney Royal as well for all the bird life and animal life and other things that she did because she was talented in many ways. So my daughter, her name is perpetuated in our hotel. It's called the Museum Hotel. And people would come from miles around to visit the Museum Hotel because inside there were beautiful display cabinets that my husband, my William, and James, who was also a builder by this stage, made these beautiful cabinets. And in this, the one that went before, in that back area, there was a big stairs went up. At the top of the stairs, can you imagine it? A big cabinet about 3 metres square, filled with Australian wildlife that was absolutely beautiful. So you came in, you went up, and there was this magnificent display, all my daughter's work. And she gave it up when she got married. She didn't do it after that. That's another story. She married a local engineer, and he took her off down to Sydney, and I didn't see so much of her after that. This photograph is quite famous for me for a number of reasons. It's the only photograph that I've got of our family, most of the family, that is. I just want to run through a couple of things about them. Remember the girl whose favourite photograph was in the wedding photograph? That's Janet when she was about 12. William became a engine driver. Charles went to New Zealand to live. Thomas became a policeman. Mark became a carpenter. Mark became an engine driver. William became a miner. Betsy got married to a Mr. Buckingham. No, Mr. Buchanan. Edward, my baby, he became a carpenter. Well, he was a jockey for a while. You can see his bill. Myself and Mary Ellen and Mark, they married into the same family, the Reichardt family, and we owe a lot of the information that we have at West Wallsend Museum to that family. It's come from them. And there's James, my beautiful, handsome, big, strong James, sitting on the end next to his father. Oh, the thing I didn't mention in that previous photograph, and it really is important, so I'll go back to it. There are 3 people who aren't in it. Well, I've told you the story of little Lucy. And Margaret, I've told you her, she went off to Sydney, got married. But Alexander was 1896. We've been in the hotel for about 8 years. He's 21, a beautiful, strong man, loved his sport, loved helping his father in the business. He went down to football practice on the Oval below where we lived on Saturday, Friday afternoon, came home, had tea, went to bed. And about 6 o'clock the next morning, he came into our room and he said, I don't feel well. And it sounded as if he was either laughing or coughing, they weren't sure which. And William got out of bed straight away and raced up, because in that accommodation, we had the doctor who was the doctor to the mines. So he came straight down, and so he was there in next to no time. And by the time he got to Alexander, it was too late. He passed away. 21. No history of any illness before. He just, his heart had they said it was a heart seizure. So we lost our beautiful son, Alexander. Okay, work goes on though, doesn't it? Always. And this is my hotel. This is our hotel. And remember, I've learned the trade pretty well when I was a young girl, so I knew pretty much what to do on the inside of a hotel. And in this bar, you can imagine there's probably filled with miners and with timber cutters and with bullockies, and there's lots of noise and lots of body odour and all this. And I enjoyed it. That was life. That was where we were. But one day I must have had a headache or something, because this young fellow was being quite obstreperous. And I thought, oh, I've had enough of this. So I lifted the thing, walked out, grabbed him by the scruff of the neck, and frog marched him out the front of the door and said, when you can behave yourself, you can come back. And the men just all shouted they said, good on you, Ma, good on you, terrific. I didn't have any trouble in my bar after that. They were very well-behaved men. So working in the bar was how I passed most of my time. And you can see some of the display. They used to be on the counter. They were all around the place. Going upstairs into the accommodation upstairs. And I told you about my beautiful birds that Margaret did. And this was one. We have this one in the museum at West Wallsend. And she was able to do something that I don't think many people in the world could do even today. She was able to capture that lyrebird entertaining, or at least forming, to attract a mate. Now, if you saw a lyrebird out in the bush today, it would just be a little brown bird with a long brown tail. Nothing impressive at all. But when it performs a mating ritual, it builds a little mould, sits on the top of the mould, puts its wings up, puts its tail up, and performs. And it can do anything up to 20 or 30 different sounds. It can mimic almost anything, from a chainsaw to a kookaburra, you name it, it can mime it. My Margaret has been able to capture that. She's been able to do that, and that bird is still like that 140 years later. I think we're very privileged in the museum to have that. And that's another one, similar to the one that would have been at the top of the stairs. And all Australian birds, I might add. I've got this one in because it's for sentimental reasons. There were emus out round Westy when we were out there, and there were emu chicks, and that's what this is. And that little girl came in one day and she's looking at it, and it just reminded me of my Lucy. And so that's why I've got both gone, the emu chick and my little chick. What was happening in town? What was happening in Westy? The mine had been opened in 1888. My family had all grown up. Well, they were in the process of growing up. And people in town were saying it's time we had some shops, some decent places to buy food instead of going over to Wallsend or wherever we had to go. And so about 22 young men got together, they pooled some of their resources, and they, so up in that top corner, that part that's jutting out, had been built as a butcher shop, but they were able to rent it, not the rest of the building, because that's something different. They were able to rent that and set it up as a cooperative store. They had brought the cooperative notion from England and from the mines in England out to Australia, and they set it up there. They had no shelves, no store, no counters, nothing. They did it all out of boxes. They put stuff on their little hand carts down on the railway, bring it up to the shop and sell it off. And it was so successful that in 18 months, they've bought land and built their own beautiful shop like this. And that was so successful that by 1905, they bought the whole street between Brown Street and Carrington Street and started on a process of building brick businesses. You didn't have to go out of West Wallsend between 1900 and 1920 to buy anything. You could buy everything from toothpaste to boots to you name it, whatever it was. All in this beautiful long set of shops that are there. You can still go down and see those buildings there. It was so modern that in the supermarkets today you can go from one department to the other. In those stores, you could go from one shop to the other without going outside. Inside, they had 3 or 4 steps from one shop up into the next, and so you could go from one to the other. Absolutely amazing. I shopped there as Mrs. Johnston. I shopped there many a time. My girls tried to get work, didn't always succeed in getting work there. Until about 1927, and then things seemed to, well, of course, a lot of the mines have closed. That's a different story. I've got this photograph in there because we depended on the railways to get the coal out, to get people out, and it made a lot of smoke and dust, but it was part of our life, what we had to live with. And there's another reason I've got this photograph. Can anyone guess what it is? Yeah. Tucked away up here in the back corner. Guess what it is? My beautiful museum hotel. You can see how close it was to the mine, how close it was to the railway line, how good it was for business. That's where we had. Comes time, it's 1900. William is now, what's that, making 73, about that. So he said, no, I think it's time we retired. And you know, that man had made provision for our retirement. Just here's the museum hotel, the street, and right there beside is our beautiful home he built. Beautiful, beautiful home. The mine, the train line comes around here, the mine is over there, and he could sit, my William, always for thinking, could sit on the front veranda and he could look straight over here because this photograph was taken from the veranda of the hotel, looking down on our house. He could sit there, he could look at the hotel, he could look across the road at the mine, he could look across the road at the train. He had a good view of everything and knew exactly what was going on. And it was my beautiful house. My kitchen was a bit like this, big and airy and ample space, absolutely marvellous. In fact, this is the house today. If you go down Wilson Street, you will see my house is still there. And the lady who lived in it made a point of saying to me, it is a beautiful home, lovely wide corridors, the kitchen is magnificent. She said, it's beautiful. In 12 years, between 1888, when the first mine was opened, and this photograph was taken, I think it's a snowball, you can see what had happened in West Wallsend. From nothing to what you see there. That's amazing, isn't it? They're just starting to put water and electricity. In fact, you can see some power poles, and the water is going to be on there sometime that year. So 1902. But I'm very proud of the photograph for another reason. Right in the centre of the photograph, the two-storied place is the house built by my son, James, the builder. He became an undertaker. He built coffins. He bought blocks and subdivided them. He was a contractor. He was a councillor. He was a mayor. And I can't think of anything else, but he was a very important man. My James lived in that house with his wife and 6 children. Time had caught up with us. 1904, and my William is not with us any longer. 77. It was a hard life that he lived, but he was a good man. He looked after us and the family and provided for us all, and he gave me my castle. Just a quick look at some of the places. There was nothing when we moved to that blue spot. Remember when I first brought you out, and we got out of the horse and sulky, horse and cart. That's where we got out. And in the next 20 years, that happened to the area. Most of those are named after men. Northville's after Mr. North, Estelville after Mr. Estel, Holmes after Holmes, Fairley after Fairley, O'Donnelltown after O'Donnelltown. As each little community grew, I saw those well. I was there at that time when those places were starting to grow. And one last thing before we get nearly to finish. We wanted better transport. Don't we always want better transport? And the women complained, and they got it. It took them quite a while to win it, but they battled from 1900 to 1910. And then the men weakened, and the tramway was built. And it was built from Wallsend out to West Wallsend and followed basically the route that we currently follow on the road, much the same as it is there. This was the celebration, September 1910. Now, my poor William's been gone 6 years at this point, and again, look what you can see in the background. My beautiful hotel. There is the museum hotel there, right beside the tram line, right beside the railway line, right beside the mine. Wonderful. 1914, 1919, World War I. What it did to communities. It devastated so many. Coal miners, shopkeepers, you name it. We've got a beautiful photograph out in the museum of a football team, a soccer team, all sitting there in their pride and glory, taken in 1914. 2 years later, half of them were dead. They had volunteered and gone to war. And I'm involved in this because 2 of my sons went to war. Mark and William went. And some people say you should have 1918 when we were finished. No, it didn't. My sons didn't come home in time for my death. I died in 1918 and they were still overseas. The war might have technically ended, but most Australian men, many Australian men, didn't get home until 1919. And in conclusion, I would just like to share with you my obituary. Mrs. Mary Johnston, relict of the late William Johnston, one of the pioneers of West Wallsend, passed away on Tuesday evening after a long illness. The deceased was in her 73rd year and had spent 55 years in and about West Wallsend. My husband predeceased me by 15 years. I leave 6 sons and 4 daughters. Councillor James Johnston of West Wallsend, Charles Johnston of New Zealand, Mrs. John Humphreys, that's my Margaret, of Sydney, Sergeant Thomas Johnson, policeman in Darlington, William and Mark on active service, and Edward Johnson in Cessnock, Mrs. E. Birmingham, that's Betsy, of course, and Mrs. J. Stenhouse, that's Janet, whose photograph was there, Mrs. A. Richards, that's Mary of West Wallsend. I was born in Somersetshire in England and came to this country when a girl with my parents, Mr. and Mrs. C. Mounter of Hexham, where she lived until she was married. When she went with her husband to live, well, it wasn't Barnsley, it was actually Appletree Flat, until the time of opening of West Wallsend Colliery, when they built the Museum Hotel and kept the same for a good many years until retiring into private life. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Benita. That was just fabulous. And having it in the first person,
Yeah,
that was
great.
gives it that much more authenticity to it. It is.
Well, just for me, it makes it easier to do that because you can under close your eyes, you can visualise like Mary sitting there with her sick little baby, or the kids out sort of, you know, there's so many stories I can tell you about the kangaroos in the garden, or it's just, you know, just something.
Oh, no, that's wonderful. Thank you so much.